Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Evolution in Peer Review, Research Integrity, Ethics, and the Role of AI. Before we dive in, let me briefly introduce myself. I am Juanita Goossens-Roach, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm a publishing operations leader with more than 2 decades of experience in peer review management and global team leadership, currently as peer review manager at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. I've overseen workflows for hundreds of journals, implemented scalable training programs, and driven innovation through technology and ethics-focused practices. Alongside my operational role, I'm on the ISMTE Board of Directors and have been and am an active member of ISMTE since 2017. It is a privilege to moderate today's session and help guide this important conversation on the evolution in peer review, particularly with research integrity, ethics, and the role of AI. So just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. I am recording this session, which will be available to everyone shortly afterwards, whether attending or otherwise. Please post any questions in the Q&A box. I'll be keeping an eye on those throughout the session, and there'll be time at the end for our panelists to answer questions. Use the thumbs up to upvote questions from others, and also the chat is open to everyone, so do use it to share thoughts, links, or reflections with the group. We'd love to hear from you. You might not see Q&A or chat options just yet as I'm screen sharing, but once I've completed this short introduction, you will have those be available to then see. So let's get started with this session. Peer review has had a long and complex history. We can trace the first formal peer review process, as we know it now, back to the 16th and 17th centuries, with figures like Copernicus and Galileo, whose work underwent early forms of scholarly scrutiny. One particularly memorable example is Miguel Servetus, a theologian and scientist, whose groundbreaking theory of pulmonary circulation was not met merely with peer review rejection, but with far harsher consequences. He was burnt at the stake on a pyre of his own manuscripts, no less. Now that is a solid reject. Thankfully, today's authors are met with constructive feedback and professional courtesy, not fire and brimstone. Fast forward to the present, and peer review is undergoing another transformation, this time driven by technology. With increasing publication volumes and growing demands for research integrity, AI tools are now being used to support everything from grammar checks to integrity screening. But how scalable and reliable are these tools, especially for high volume journals? In this session, we will explore how peer review has evolved, how AI is being integrated into editorial workflows, and what this means for the future of research ethics and trust in scholarly publishing. We're joined by a brilliant panel of experts, and I'm looking forward to a rich and thought-provoking discussion. We have Jennifer Paxton Boyd, Publishing Director for Science Journals, Oxford University Press. Based in Oxford, UK, Jennifer has worked at OUP for over 17 years across science and medical journals, with a focus on partnerships with learned societies. In her role, Jennifer leads the Global Science Journals programme. And we also have Professor John Mathis, Emeritus Professor at Human Nutrition at Newcastle University, UK. His major research interests are in underlying how eating patterns influence risk of age-related diseases, including diabetes, dementia, and cancer. This includes studies of the underlying mechanisms and investigation of lifestyle-based interventions to reduce disease risk. John was president of the Nutrition Society and serves or has served on multiple research boards in the UK and internationally. He is a trustee of the Rank Prize and the British Nutrition Foundation, and since 2019 has been editor-in-chief of the British Journal of Nutrition. Neither John nor Jennifer have any disclosures to declare when it comes to conflicts of interest. And just a few shouts out to ISMTE itself. We have a 4-part module series of AI workshops in January, February of 2026, all focused on generative AI, as you can see the 4 modules there. We have single module option, bulk registration for more than one registrant, and discount multi-module payments as well. I'll put the links to these in the chat afterwards, as you obviously cannot access these links currently. And please join ISMT. There's so many benefits to being a member. Join today. So there's access to editorial office news, the continuing education and training through our research library, live events such as this webinar today and others planned for 2026, workshops as mentioned, the highly anticipated annual conference as well, and other live events, online discussion forum and much more. Networking with more than 1,000 people in across 15 plus countries, discounted registration to ISMTE's conferences, and access to members-only networking and training opportunities as well. Again, I'll put a link to this in the chat shortly afterwards. And are you interested in volunteering for ISMTE? Our committees are always looking for motivated members and volunteers. Use the form again in the chat, which I'll put in shortly, to submit your information to volunteer. Please note ISMTE membership is required for joining a committee. And I should also note it is time to renew your memberships as well for the following year. So with all of that said, great. Let's get into the questions for our panelists. So the evolution of peer review, as I mentioned, has come a long way from handwritten critiques to digital platforms and open peer reviews models as we have now. How have peer review practices evolved over time, and how shifts in transparency, reviewer expectations, and editorial workflows that are shaping the current landscape? So my first question is to John. How have you seen peer review evolve during your time as an editor-in-chief? Are there particular shifts, such as in reviewer expectations or transparency, that stand out? I think we may have lost. Oh, John's joining us back. Can you hear us okay, John?
Yeah, it's absolutely fine now, but I
Great.
lost you for a minute or two.
Would you like me to, shall I repeat the question to you? So
Yes,
in
didn't hear
terms,
the question at all.
okay, so in terms of the evolution of peer review, as noted, peer review has come a long way. So how have you seen peer review evolve during your time as editor-in-chief? Are there particular shifts, such as in reviewer expectations or transparency, that stand out?
Thank you very much. Yes, it's a great pleasure to be with you for this webinar. In the 7 years, or nearly 7 years, that I've been an editor-in-chief, there have been big changes in the behavior of both authors and peer reviewers that have made the peer review process much more complex and more challenging. Some of these are in the areas of ethics, which I'm sure we'll get on to a little bit later, and they are sufficiently problematical that they could undermine confidence in the whole peer review process. The other issue, of course, is the sheer volume of manuscripts that many journals are now receiving. And this increase in workload means that it's increasingly difficult to get peer reviewers to accept invitations to undertake the peer review process. So where in the past we might have had to ask half a dozen people to get 2 good peer reviews, now we might have to ask 10, 20, or maybe more people to do 2 good peer reviews. And linked with that, the quality of some of the peer reviews that we get is not very good. So that's a real problem. And of course, these problems are being exacerbated by the activity of paper mills, which undermine the integrity of the scientific endeavor and of the peer review process worldwide. Linked with that, of course, we've now in the last 3 years had the advent of all kinds of AI-based tools that are changing the way in which people are doing research, changing the way in which they're writing the papers, and changing the way in which peer review is happening. All of that is happening very, very quickly. The technology is moving faster than I think most of us can keep up with. And it's very, very challenging for journals to handle. I think maybe I'll just leave it at that point because there's quite a lot of detail that we can go into with later questions, but I'll leave it at that for now.
No, no, you are right. I think reviewer fatigue, or rather securing reviewers, is getting harder and harder for all journals, regardless of research area. I think the more niche ones particularly are harder as well. Jennifer, from an operational perspective, what changes have you implemented to support evolving peer review models, and how have these impacted journal workflows or integrity checks?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. And again, yeah, pleasure to be here at the webinar. Juanita, you mentioned, the long history of peer review, and it really is so foundational to the scholarly publishing process. And I think that the sort of fundamental concept of getting validation or verification by your fellow scholars or researchers does remain unchanged. And I think, the resilience of that concept really does speak to its value and its importance. But of course, there have been changes in expectations, as John has mentioned, but also in our processes. So things like open peer review, and that can be, varying degrees of openness, whether that's everything out in the open, or perhaps just, differences in blinding and whether reviews are published alongside the article, for example. So I think that's there's a scale there. And a number of models, I guess, of peer review are supportable, and journals really can sort of choose their preference, and often that's informed by an editor's preference or more community norms. What's the expectation there? So we've definitely found that we've had to build in flexibility in terms of our systems and operations to make sure that we can support that. Where it's important for different communities to have different models. I guess another change in expectation is really around speed, and certainly in science and medicine, where my experience is, that's been a massive driver. So making things easier, quicker, more efficient, more straightforward has been really important. And as John referenced, that a lot of the changes that we've made and that we're continuing to explore are around reducing the pressure in the system, making it easier for editors, making it easier for reviewers, and so on. So various things we've put in place there might be things like structured reviews. So rather than just having somebody write a narrative, maybe guiding them through a process of things you want them to comment on, giving them sort of scales and particular metrics that you might want to. And I think there's a balance for journals in sort of putting a structure in place versus giving people the freedom to express what they might want to about the paper themselves. But yes, lots of change, but really it is about sort of trying to preserve the value of that fundamental concept, and as John said, trying to sort of protect it, because it is the best system that we've got, and it's been remarkably resilient, and we hope to keep it that way.
No, exactly. And it has been, well, the first logged peer review, if you like, was around the 16th, 17th century, where obviously they didn't use technology at the time, but it is the same basic practice that we do now, basically manuscripts or submissions sent for reviews by peers. Obviously, times have changed where it's not handled, where everything's technologically based and quicker as well. But also, as John referenced as well, there's been a lot of discussions, a lot of movement in terms of AI, particularly the last couple of years as well. And that
Maybe
moves
I
us
can
on
just,
to, sorry, go
sorry,
ahead, John.
just to add a little bit to that, because of these pressures on the peer review process and the difficulties of getting good peer reviews in a timely fashion, some people have argued that maybe the time of traditional peer review has ended and we need to think of a new model. And of course, there are some examples of that out there already with, for example, preprints, where people can publish effectively, or at least expose their preprint to public view. And some of my colleagues have argued that that might be the future, that we kind of leave it to the market to decide what's a good piece of work and what's not a good piece of work. Because if it isn't good, it won't be cited and used in the future. Whereas if it is useful, it will be used. There's some truth in that, but I think that it's not time to get rid of conventional peer review just yet. I think there's a lot of benefits, and I will continue to use that for my particular journal. But it's just something to bear in mind that there are all other models out there, and some of them are being promoted quite heavily.
No, that's exactly true. Let's move on to AI usage by authors. With tools like Grammarly, ChatGPT, and other AI writing assistants becoming commonplace, authors now have more support than ever in preparing their manuscripts. But where do we draw the line between helpful enhancement and problematic automation? How AI is being used by authors and how editorial teams are responding? So my question on this is to Jennifer first. How are editorial teams currently detecting or managing AI-generated content in submissions? And are there clear policies or grey areas that still need addressing?
Yeah, so most of our journals do ask authors to declare where they've used AI tools. It's not necessarily forbidden by any means, but we do, I think, need some transparency around that so that editors and reviewers can make judgments accordingly. So I think, there are acceptable and legitimate uses, particularly around, language improvement. And that also makes it more accessible for people, who may be publishing in not their native language, right? That's often been a bit of a barrier. I think what we can do to reduce that barrier is really important. I would say opinions do vary amongst our editors about these other types of use. For example, preparing a literature review section using an AI tool. I think people can argue that either way. But I think almost all our editors will be agreed on the need for human oversight and verification where authors have used those. We do ask authors to be honest about that. There is a great deal of trust there at the moment. And we also want them to, if they have used it, ensure that they have checked the material properly. I think there can be a difference between really domain-specific AI tools that might be sort of widespreadly used within a particular community, and the sort of general, perhaps I can call them consumer tools like ChatGPT, which might be less reliable when we come to really the cutting edge of research, because obviously it's based on the content that's out there at the moment, where ChatGPT, it can't be an expert at that very, very cutting edge. So I think there can be problematic uses there. In terms of the sort of detecting and managing, so we're trialing a number of tools, but really results are pretty mixed, I would say. I don't think we have a foolproof capability at the moment. The tools themselves get better and better. And actually what we're finding is that most often the AI use is detected most effectively by a human, by an editor or a reviewer. It's those qualitative aspects of when you're reading something, oh, this sounds like AI, it reads like an AI generated piece of text. So, but it's tricky, right? Because that's not particularly scalable. So yes, I think lots of challenges here. We try to sort of be clear with authors about our policies, but as I said, it's really still quite an honor system as to how much they do abide by that disclosure.
No, exactly. It's about authors being transparent during their submission process and answering the questions provided. But I think, as you made a good point, a lot of the AI tools that we use for detecting things still need a human to then interpret the results or take action on it as well. Obviously, the AI tool or report might use a traffic light system to denote the level of the issue that needs to be resolved. However, a human then needs to actually take action on that as well.
Yeah, we talked about pressure in the system. We're adding tasks there, aren't we? So
exactly, and adding tasks to humans as well, I suppose as well. John, what's your view on authors using AI tools like Grammarly or ChatGPT to polish their manuscripts? Where do you personally draw the line between acceptable support and problematic automation?
Okay, so I start from the perspective that improvements in technology that help us do better science, do better research, do better scholarly work, or to write papers is a good thing. And of course, as Jennifer said, if you're writing in a foreign language, that can be very helpful too with grammar, with spelling, with expressing complex ideas. And all of that, I think, is good. It's also very helpful for colleagues who have, for example, neurological issues like dyslexia, which make it difficult to write clearly. All of that can help to level the playing field. And I think that's a good thing for publishing. But quickly we get into a gray area where it becomes unclear whether the words are really the words of the author or whether the words are the words of some AI tool that's being used to help generate the text. And as Jennifer has said, we don't yet have foolproof methods for detecting the use of those kind of AI tools. And yeah, in my experience as well, it's been the individual human being who's best at detecting misuse of AI for those kind of things. I suppose I would focus here maybe more on the issues around AI for peer review itself. So it's increasingly easy, for example, to upload manuscripts into ChatGPT or whatever and ask the tool to provide a critical review of that paper. And that sometimes can work very well. But it's a real problem because once you upload the manuscript, all of that data, all of that information, all of those ideas are in the public domain. And the confidentiality that authors expect of the peer review process has been breached. So we, like many other journals and publishers, ask peer reviewers not to do that. So when they accept an invitation from us to undertake peer review, it's on the understanding that they'll not upload manuscripts to a large language model or something like that. The problem is we depend on the peer reviewer's honesty. And we don't really know if they tick that box and say yes, that they really have done what they've said. And that integrity issue pervades most of the issues around AI. That said, I think there's real opportunities for AI to enhance how we do peer review and may help with the quality of peer review. But I think for that we need closed systems where manuscripts can be uploaded to some tool or instrument, but which doesn't allow that information to escape into the rest of the global information infrastructure. So I think that puts the onus on publishers to have systems that can do the job, but with the security for authors that their ideas will not become available to everyone before they're published. If we have that system working well, I think it has a number of advantages. It may help with the sheer burden of peer review by lowering the amount of work that human beings have to do. It could improve the rigor of peer review because we know that the current system has a number of biases that are brought to the peer review system by the individual undertaking the peer review. And it may make peer review more timely. But I think there's quite a lot of guarantees that we need to build into systems before I think we can just willy-nilly say, yeah, AI is the answer to all of these problems.
Great. All right, so let's move on to AI tools for editorial offices, as we just talked about the usage for authors. So it isn't just about supporting authors, as that is really useful, as we've discussed. It's also making its way into editorial offices. From reviewer selection to decision support, new tools are being trialed to streamline workflows. How are these technologies being adopted, and what benefits and risks they bring to peer review management? So back to you, John. How have you used or considered using AI tools to assist with editorial decision making or reviewer selection, and what are the benefits and risks from your perspective?
Yes, I think we, like many other journals and publishers, are using AI-based tools at various stages in the peer review process. So, for example, we use them to check whether manuscripts have adhered to the guidelines that are needed for submission of that type of manuscript. So all the relevant information is included. If, for example, the studies had to be registered, that they've been registered properly, those kind of things, all the kind of technical aspects around the submission. It's also quite commonplace now to use AI-based tools for plagiarism checking. to just make sure that people haven't copied chunks of work from others and included that in their manuscripts. And the third area, I think, which we're using increasingly AI-based tools, is for matching manuscripts with peer reviewers and indeed with editors. And the advantage of that is that will ensure that we get the right manuscript to the right peer reviewer, and they're asked to review fewer overall, but ones that they're much more likely to be interested in. And we think that will then increase the likelihood that we'll say yes, and that we'll get good reviews back. So it's a process which is happening already, and all of those sides of it, I think, are non-controversial. The more difficult bit is around decision-making. Where AI-based tools can be helpful is in checking around authenticity of authors and the provenance of manuscripts. So looking out for issues around paper mills. Also for checking whether there are duplicate submissions, so submissions of the same manuscript to 2 or more journals simultaneously. And also for looking at issues of remit. All of that can be done early on in the peer review process, and I think will and should lead to more desk rejections before manuscripts get into the peer review process. And I think that's a benefit for authors, because if their manuscript isn't suitable for the journal, they know quickly and they can go elsewhere, and it reduces the burden on the whole peer review process. So I think these are moves in the right direction. What I would be very cautious about is involving AI-based tools in the final decision-making, because I think that requires experience, judgment, which at the moment I think requires humans, not machines.
No, exactly. I think AI tools at the moment can supplement the peer review process, especially, as you made a good point, especially with finding reviewers, which otherwise pre-AI tools that we have as well, it was a very manual process. It's not time that the editors that we have on our journals have time to then search out reviewers. So they return back to the same reviewers. However, that adds to reviewer fatigue. It doesn't include the reviewer pool, etc., and all of that goes with it. So I see it at the moment as supplementing the process, and shouldn't be used in actual the decision-making process. That should still be, and hopefully will always continue to be done by a human. Jennifer, what AI tools are currently being trialed or adopted in editorial offices, and how do you assess their reliability and accuracy in supporting peer review?
Yeah, I think it's worth saying as well that, many of the tools we're talking about here, we've long used tools that use machine learning, right? It's not all about ChatGPT and large language models. So there's elements of AI that have been in place for many, many years. I think when I think about the tools that we're deploying, they sort of fall into 2 broad categories. There's the ones that do the sorts of things that John was talking about assisting in the review process itself, the sort of qualitative aspects of that. And then there are the ones around integrity checks. So I'll talk about the latter first. And unfortunately, I can't actually name many of the tools that we do work with, because we're in something of an arms race with the bad actors out there. So, if we publicize the kind of tools that we're using to screen manuscripts, they will adapt and find ways around that. So that's unfortunate. When we're considering tools, we're really looking at 2 sides of functionality as well. There's obviously checking individual manuscripts, which will matter to each individual editorial office that we work with. But then we're also looking at tools that might identify patterns across our portfolio. So paper mill networks and things like that, which it really is hard to identify unless you have that sort of top level view of a large number of papers going through a system. So looking at patterns and trends. And on the individual manuscript side, many of the things that John already mentioned around duplicate submission, paper mill activity, and plagiarism, we've used Authenticate for a long time. That's well established. We're experimenting with things around image manipulation, author identity checking, and also things like sort of broad spectrum manuscript checks, so searching for common AI flags like the so-called tortured phrases, so things that a human would rarely say, but for whatever reason that I don't understand, are often generated by some of these Gen AI tools. So we've got some flags on that as well. I would say on the peer review side, of course, there's the reviewer matching, which is extremely helpful for all the reasons that we've already talked about. When it comes to sort of things that are more, I guess, deeper than that, so evaluating manuscripts, I think these tools can very effectively summarize manuscripts, and maybe that will help with desk reject to assess whether something's in scope or out of scope, for example. But we do have to balance that with, what expertise these tools have. Do they have the domain-specific knowledge to be able to do that? Are they accurate? Are there likely to be hallucinations? And obviously confidentiality, which we've mentioned, and I've seen there's been discussion in the chat about the walled garden, and many of the tools we're looking at do have that, because that is really paramount for the peer review process. I would say when we sort of evaluate and assess them, it's been a real mixed bag of results, to be honest. I think, a tool has to be fairly smoothly integrated into a submission system for it to be useful and for it to be scalable for us, across our 500 plus journals. But in terms of feedback from editors and editorial offices, it's really mixed, actually. Particularly if results are quite simplistic. So if a manuscript is just flagged, great, then a human has to go and spend however long they have to spend figuring it out. So I think the specificity of what's been found is really important. But I would also say, we're still maybe not very early days, but I think we're still quite early in this process. The tools are getting better. We're getting more familiar with using them. So I think we're hopeful, certainly, that this kind of mixed picture will begin to tend towards a more helpful picture over time. But certainly we're not there yet. There's lots of experimentation and lots of trials, but nothing that's really, doing everything that's embedded.
Yeah, I think that's a problem with a lot of tools, and I think we have a question on this. We'll come to the questions at the end. But I think at the moment, a lot of tools are really good at something individually. So nothing is
Exactly
like going to solve the entire problem. But then again, some of the tools that we have like levels of accuracy on those individual points, individual problems that they're trying to solve as well. So I've seen a lot of tools that I think that's really good, but there's also 10 more other things that we need it to check in the process as well. So we have a lot of individual tools that I would like to see kind of like lining up together, but then can be like customizable, because it's not going to be one size fits all for every journal or publishing organization, and also configurable as well depending on individual journals' needs. So not just customizable for publishing organizations, but as you know, not every journal that any press publishes or publishing organization publishes is going to do the same. Needs the same parameters with these checks. So I think it's definitely something that would be good to see it kind of combine them together. But at the moment, I've seen a lot of useful tools, but they're kind of individual problem focused. So that moves on to scalability. Sorry, John, were you going to say something?
I was just
sorry,
just to come in there again, just to say that for some kinds of papers and for some kinds of studies, tools that help with checking for quality of images and checking for image manipulation could be incredibly valuable. And also tools that can make it possible for reviewers to check the veracity of statistical or mathematical processes that have been applied to complex data sets. All of that would, I think, improve the quality of the peer review process. But that needs to go hand in hand with openness about the primary data and the willingness of authors to make the primary data available. But I think, yes, it's all part of that suite of tools that we need to be able to address the different aspects of peer review.
Exactly, yes. All right, so moving on to scalability of these AI solutions. So as you know, submission volumes continue to rise. Scalability becomes a key concern. Can AI help journals manage peer review more efficiently without compromising quality? So let's explore the potential and limitations of AI tools in high volume publishing environments. So to Jennifer, how scalable are current AI tools for large journal portfolios? Are there infrastructure or training challenges that need to be addressed?
Yeah, there's a lot here, and when you mentioned about all the individual tools kind of lining up together, if we add in tools for image manipulation, tools for reference checking, tools for plagiarism, cost is going to be an issue, right? If you're doing that across, even if your journals have a more pick and mix approach, that's still a lot of extra stuff that is happening, a lot of extra systems that we're integrating and subscribing to. So certainly at scale, cost is going to be a challenge, and particularly I think for smaller organizations that maybe don't have that, the sort of financial profile to be able to easily absorb that. I think we also find that training is a challenge. You have to teach people how to use these tools and how to get the best out of them. So that takes time. Everybody has to adapt to that. There's an additional task there. For us, when we're selecting the partners and systems that we're going to be doing trials or pilots with, we have to go through an approval process that involves, data security and all of these kinds of technical compliance factors as well. So, these requirements are necessarily rigorous. I think that everything is there for a good reason, but it does mean that as an organization, we have to be pretty selective and targeted in the tools that we do try. We can't just try everything. It's just not practical. One thing we also get a bit of pushback about from our publishing partners is around the environmental impact of deploying AI tools at scale. So, we need to be sure that we're doing that responsibly, that we're factoring that into our sort of overarching carbon and environmental goals as well. So, yeah, certainly, I guess having enough journals to have some scale helps with this, but yes, lots of challenges there as well.
Now, you're right in the fact that all of these tools, however they are rolled out, whether they're piloted, phased rolled out, or mass rollout, it comes with a number of challenges. Main one is the training involved with who is going to benefit from it, how do they interact with the tool, what do they, as I mentioned, like the initial screening of a manuscript, we have tools that highlight something is wrong with a paper, but then a human has to then follow that up with do we need to send it back to the authors? Do we need to escalate it? We need to find out why the tool is highlighting that and resolve it before then moving on as well. I think one of the main challenges is usage of the tools as well, particularly the editorial office side, because it is going to add to the workload of editorial offices to, like I said, to resolve the issues that the tools have otherwise highlighted. And yes, you are right with cost as well. In terms, we have to be quite pick selectively the tools. We can't trial everything, we can't implement everything, and we have to pick those that are most useful and beneficial for all key stakeholders involved. So to John, on scalability, for journals with high submission volumes, do you think AI can help scale peer review without compromising quality? And what safeguards would you want in place?
I think that we have to use AI and whatever other kinds of technology is available to help with the sheer challenges of the volume of papers that many journals are receiving. So I don't think there's an either or here. I think we just have to use these kind of tools. Otherwise, we're going to be swamped by the sheer volume of manuscripts. The problem, of course, is that it raises issues around transparency and trust. As Jennifer mentioned earlier, because of the arms race that we're in with things like paper mills, we're reluctant to tell people exactly what tools and so on we're using. So we as journals and publishers are not being entirely transparent about the tools that we're using. And I think that's an issue, if I was an author, in being confident about how my manuscript is being managed, because I'm not being told exactly what's being used in the peer review process. So that's an issue, and I don't think we have a solution to that at the moment. As we develop more and more of these tools and as we're confident in their use, I think we should be as open and transparent as possible with authors about how we're using them and what part that plays in the peer review process, because of the need for trust, because that underpins everything in peer review. As editors, we're increasingly being given access to AI-based tools to help us in our work. In my experience so far, we don't get very much information about how the tool's been developed, about its strengths and limitations, and as been mentioned earlier, there are training issues. So it's an issue which I think is just getting bigger as the problem gets more and more complex. And we need, I think, to have better training. We need to have more openness about not only what these tools can do, but about what their limitations are and how we can avoid those limitations or minimize them. So we have to use them, but I think we're in a rapidly changing landscape, and it remains problematical.
Mm. All right, so let's move on to reference checks and integrity screening. So maintaining research integrity is a cornerstone, if not the cornerstone, of peer review. With increasing concerns around citation manipulation and plagiarism, reference checks and screening tools are more important than ever. How are these processes evolving, and what technologies are helping to uphold ethical standards? So back to you again, John. How important are reference checks in maintaining research integrity? And do you think they should be part of the peer review process or handled separately?
It's a really important question, and it's increasingly important because of the way in which citations are being used by employers and others in evaluating the work and the productivity of researchers. So we need to get it right. And of course, it's a process, the whole business of references and citations, which is open to misuse. And although it's always been part of the peer review process that peer reviewers would check the references, I think in reality, not all the references are ever checked in papers. And so there's a real risk that things will be cited which are either inappropriate or are simply in there to inflate the citations of friends or colleagues, or indeed of the individual authors. So I think we need better ways of doing reference checking, and I think some of these AI-based tools can certainly help with that. The other issue that's kind of related to this is just checking that the people who are undertaking the peer reviewing are who they say they are. And we've had quite a bit of issue recently with identity checks around peer reviewers. And although use of ORCID and those kind of things can help, it's not a complete solution.
I think, and I see a chat. I see a post in the chat as well. Reference checks can be done, but only if it's a small journal with small journal. Sorry, a journal with small submissions, because I know that to check references from a human perspective takes a lot of time. It also takes a lot of, well, not experience, but you have to know what you need to check for. And the tools that we have currently do highlight the things that otherwise a human might not initially know to check for, and then they can follow up. I'm finding a lot with the tools that we have at the moment do that. They will bring to attention things that need to then be addressed by a human to take forwards. So like the references, etc. Because otherwise a person does not have time, editorial office, editor, reviewer even, will not have the time to review every single reference. Some manuscripts have quite a few references in them, and that's just a single manuscript as well. So to you, Jennifer, on reference checks and integrity screening, what tools or processes are being used to verify references and citations, and how effectively are they in identifying issues like citation manipulation or plagiarism?
Yeah, I would say this is one of the areas where we've had better results on our trials and our tools, because, you know, in theory it should be a highly structured, how can I express this, a sort of machine capable task, right? You take this thing, you go and look over there, does it exist? Yes. And, you know, you're identifying patterns in citation networks. So, and that has been borne out in our experience. Some of these tools are pretty effective. So, you know, we're using tools which look at actually many of the things that have been called out in the chat. You know, whether there's a reference to a paper that's been retracted, and how, you know, important that is, citation networks, excessive self-citation, all of these kinds of things. And also, somebody's mentioned in the chat that this is one of the main areas of hallucinations. And we had a case on one of our journals recently where actually the reviewer was referenced or had a paper in the reference list, and they came back and said, well, yes, I published with these co-authors, I've even published in the journal, but this paper does not exist. So it's, you know, it's sort of a plausible case, but it took the person to whom it referenced to actually kind of pick that up. So, you know, these are the kind of things that that should be very easy to do for a machine, really. And I think this is an area where tools really can reduce the burden on humans' time, because really the humans aren't adding. With respect to the case that's been pointed out in the chat, you know, this is something where it could be more efficient. And I would say, you know, as well as the tools that sort of plug in, some of the submission systems we work with are developing native tools to do this kind of thing as well. And I think, you know, the more that can happen, the better. But yes, certainly, as has been said, this is an area where it's pretty ripe for both bad actors to sort of be doing nefarious things, but also where we can potentially have more of an impact on those protective measures.
Exactly, and these tools also highlight not just checking the references as well for how accurate they are, but also these tools can check how relevant the reference is as well, depending on obviously the subject matter of the paper as well, but how up to date the reference is, like, is it an old reference that's being used? And also, is it referencing a retracted manuscript as well? Otherwise, a human is not going to know that unless they look at every single reference and look that up. And as I said, if a single manuscript has got like 30, 40 references in it, which is not unheard of, that's a lot of manuscripts to go and check to see just on the reference side. And then you've got the manuscript content itself, and then you've got all the other aspects as well. I think it can be really helpful there. I see we've got quite a few questions in the Q&A. We've got so my last question to the panelists before we move on to the questions from attendees. We'll go through quickly. So ethical boundaries in future direction. So as peer review continues to evolve, so too must our ethical frameworks. From AI-generated content to reviewer anonymity, new challenges are emerging. In this final section, we'll reflect on the ethical boundaries that need clearer definition and consider what the future holds for integrity in peer review. So that'd be quite quick fire. So back to you, Jennifer. What future developments do you foresee in peer review integrity, and how can editorial teams prepare for emerging ethical challenges?
I think the reviewer's use of Gen AI is really key here. And, you know, we've discussed that a little bit already, but I was in a meeting several weeks ago where somebody said to me, well, of course, reviewers, you know, that would be the first thing I would do if I was reviewing a paper. I'd put it into ChatGPT, and I sort of tried to mask my horror. But I think we have to be realistic that people are going to do that. And until we can provide better tools that we are, you know, within which we can maintain confidentiality, I think we do have to accept that there is a risk there. And I think there's more to do in educating reviewers as well, because some of them may not have even thought about the fact that that paper is ingested by the LLM and is then, you know, made available, and so they've breached confidentiality. Maybe people, you know, who aren't sort of doing this as their day job don't think about it in those terms. So I think we can do a bit more there. I think there's got to be better ways to verify identities, whether that's through things like ORCID trust markers or, you know, other technologies. There must be a way to preserve some of that identity verification through the various different systems that people interact with. That feels like a solvable problem by technology. And as we've said, a lot of these challenges are really related to the pressure on reviewers. So anything we can do to minimize the burden there, avoid overusing them, better support for portable peer reviews between organizations and not just within portfolios would help. And we've talked a bit about the scope for AI to improve the quality of peer review, because the AI in theory can review against the whole of the published literature, not just what one person has been able to read. And of course, we have to balance that against the risk of hallucinations. But I think we do have to accept that the boundary of what is deemed acceptable use of AI tools is likely to shift as wider societal norms shift. And I think as an industry, we have to ask ourselves, do we want to lead that within our industry, or are we always going to be sort of trailing behind and chasing after it?
Exactly. On to you, John, before we then go into Q&As from attendees. As peer review continues to evolve, what ethical boundaries do you think the community needs to define more clearly, especially around AI and reviewer anonymity?
So I think the whole reviewer anonymity is a contested area. And of course, some journals are experimenting with open reviewing so that peer review anonymity is not a question. So that, I think, is an area which will be subject to experimentation. We still don't know what will be the best model there. In relation to the use of AI, I think the real challenges are around bad actors and paper mills and so on, and all the ethical issues in that area. And it's not just about generation of the manuscripts and how they've been generated and whether they really are the result of intellectual effort by academics or other researchers, or whether they're just being generated by some AI tool. And also the linked issue of the misuse of the peer review system by getting peer reviews into the system that are not independent of the original manuscript. And I'm being very cautious in my use of words there, because there's a lot of complexity in those relationships between paper mills and peer reviewers. We've seen, for example, the same computer submitting both the manuscript and the peer review. So it's a real problem. So it's that area where I think we need the ethical boundaries to be drawn and to be then policed. And the police, it's not easy.
No, exactly. Okay, let's go to the Q&As from attendees. I'm just going to read them out. Well, I won't read them out in full because some of them are quite long, but read them out just in order that they were put into the Q&A. So we have this one from an anonymous attendee in terms of publisher tools to check for integrity. As I said, for myself, I've seen a lot of tools that do one thing really great, but then it might do the other thing not so great. But we want something that does not everything, but more of everything that we need great. And from this anonymous attendee, they're asking, what do you suggest that editors do prior to sending for peer review to avoid wasting peer reviewer time? I'll pose that to Jennifer first.
Yeah, I guess, I would encourage people to use the tools that are available and perhaps lobby for those that are available but perhaps not integrated with your system at the moment. Like I said, I think we're kind of at early days, but I think what's called out in this question is about avoiding wasting peer reviewer time, which has come up several times. And I think we really have to sensibly deploy tools to ensure that when a paper goes out the door to a peer reviewer, the proverbial door, all that we're asking them to do is assess the quality of the research. So, a lot of these hurdles have already been passed by the screening tool. So I think that's it. It's just sort of sensible deployment. We have to obviously hope that the tools continue to evolve and improve. And that's really the best we can do, I think.
No, you're right. I think it's making sure the manuscript is suitable for peer review assessment. Then there's nothing missing. There's no question of like reference checks and anything like that. All of that should be completed before it's sent out for external peer review. I'm not including the editors in this, but the reviewers that we send them out, because it does otherwise potentially waste their time and add to reviewer fatigue. I won't ask John the same question, unless, of course, you want to add anything, John, of course.
I was just going to pick up the second half of that question from that particular person, which was around issues of equity and fairness in that initial screening process. And I think that's really important. And I think we just need to get that right so that we don't undermine confidence and people don't feel that somehow or other they have been mistreated because their manuscript didn't go out for peer review. And I think people who are submitting manuscripts from smaller communities, low and middle income countries may feel particularly vulnerable in this respect. So some journals have attempted to deal with this by having a kind of an anonymized screening where you remove some of the identifiers so that's less of a problem. But I think it remains something we need to get right.
No, exactly, because otherwise there's potential bias. And I think peer review models, I'm talking about like double anonymized, potentially triple as well, or even single as well, can help with removing otherwise unfair bias. Okay, let's go to the next question that we have from Mary. So to you, John. First of all, does the panel believe that AI will be used as part of the peer review process in, say, 1 year or 3 to 5 years or longer?
Well, as we've heard through the webinar, it's already being used, so it's here. And I think it will become increasingly part of the process. The walled garden idea of having tools which allow that to be done with confidence, so there's no breach of the author's rights, is critical. But it's here, and I think it's just a matter of developing it in ways that are to the benefit not only of the journals, but also, most importantly, of the authors.
Exactly. Jennifer, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, same. I think, it's integrated now. It's going to become more and more part of the business as usual. Yeah, I think especially on that qualitative aspect, I think we will see more and more of that.
Yeah, I think we kind of have to combat the usage by authors as well, to in terms of the editorial office side, and I include editors and editorial boards in that as well. I am conscious of time, so let's look at this next question from Dominic in terms of is there any effort among publishers to create an author blacklist for those found submitting papers that are created against journal policies? At the moment, I think a lot of it is internal to the individual journal, but however, that doesn't help, say, if an author jumps from one journal to another without consequences as well, and also duplicate submissions. Jennifer, would you like to answer that question first?
So definitely, perhaps not in the way that Dominic outlines here, but there are across publisher, cross system efforts, and many of these tools actually that we've been sort of rather obliquely referencing do that. So if there's been a flag somewhere, then that will be shown elsewhere. So I think it's definitely not foolproof and it's not sort of seamlessly integrated, but there are certainly things that do this, and I think that will become an increasingly important part of it, because like you say, otherwise it's a bit of a sort of game of whack-a-mole, isn't it? And we can't expect editors to be on top of that.
No, exactly. And John, you mentioned duplicate checks. So that's not just duplicate checks within the single journal, but also duplicate checks across other journals as well.
Absolutely. And we are increasingly using that, and it has proved, well, it's shown to us how common this issue is. As an individual journal, we weren't aware of what a big problem it was, but once we started using one of these duplicate detection tools, we could see that this is really much, much more common than we expected. So yeah, it's been very helpful. And our experience so far has been that authors have been very responsive to us when we have pointed this out and explained that this wasn't something which is ethically acceptable. I just maybe mentioned this point that I was part of a webinar a little while ago where it was being argued that we as journals and publishers are disadvantaging authors by not allowing them to submit to 2 or more journals at the same time. So that's an interesting idea of itself, which may be a discussion for another time.
I think that then opens up to almost like a lottery system as well. The more tickets you buy, the more chance you have of winning. So the more, and it's kind of unfair as well to other authors. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time for questions. I know we've got 4 others, few in the chat as well. But thank you all so much for joining us today for this timely and thought-provoking conversation. As we have seen, peer review is not a static process. It's evolving rapidly in response to technological innovation, growing demands for transparency, and the need to uphold research integrity in an increasing complex publishing landscape. Our panelists have shared valuable insights into how AI is reshaping both author and editorial workflows and what ethical boundaries we need to define as we move forward. Whether you're an editor, publisher, researcher, or technologist, your role in shaping the future of peer review is vital. Let's continue to ask the hard questions, embrace innovation responsibly, and ensure that peer review remains a cornerstone of trust in scholarly publishing. A huge thank you to our speakers, John and Jennifer, and to all of you for your thoughtful engagement in the chat. I will see if the chat can be shared along with this recording as well, because there's a lot of really good information and about those other questions too. We hope you leave today's session feeling informed, inspired, and ready to contribute to the next chapter in peer review. So take care, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Right.